This guy still remembers the exact moment he decided to go through with it. It wasn't loud. There was no dramatic scene, no one pushing him, no urgency from the outside. Just a quiet evening, a screen in front of him, and an opportunity that, on the surface, looked structured, professional, and convincing. The numbers were presented clearly. The explanation sounded confident, and the overall setup gave the impression that this was something organized and reliable. For this guy, who had been thinking about ways to grow money faster, it didn't immediately feel like a mistake. It felt like a possibility. For a long time, this guy had been following the usual advice: save consistently, invest patiently, think long-term. But patience, in his experience, felt slow, too slow. Expenses were rising. Inflation was quietly eating into savings, and then watching money grow at a gradual pace didn't feel satisfying anymore. So when this opportunity appeared, it didn't trigger immediate rejection. Instead, it triggered curiosity. And curiosity, in this guy's case, quickly turned into interest. This guy didn't rush blindly. He observed the details, asked a few questions, and tried to understand how the system worked. But the nature of those questions mattered. They weren't deeply skeptical or designed to challenge legitimacy. They were more focused on returns, timelines, and how the process functioned. In other words, this guy was trying to understand how it could work, not whether it should be trusted in the first place. That subtle difference shaped the entire decision-making process. As the explanations continued and the presentation remained consistent, this guy started building a sense of confidence. There were no immediate contradictions and no obvious red flags that forced it to stop. Everything appeared smooth enough to reduce hesitation. And slowly, without realizing it, this guy began to shift from questioning mode into believing mode. The mind, when it sees something that aligns with its desire for growth, often begins to fill in the missing gaps with optimism rather than doubt. At some point, this guy stopped asking himself whether the opportunity was completely verified and started asking a different question. What if this actually works? That shift is subtle, but powerful. Because once the focus moves from risk to reward, the emotional weight of the decision changes. The imagination begins to take over. This guy started picturing the outcome, how it would feel to see the returns, and how it would validate the decision, and how it could potentially accelerate his financial progress. Eventually, this guy made the decision to invest $100,000. It didn't feel impulsive in the moment, but psychologically it was influenced by optimism and the desire not to miss out on something that seemed promising. Right after committing the funds, there was a brief pause, a small internal hesitation surfaced. A moment where this guy questioned whether everything had been evaluated properly. But instead of revisiting that doubt, this guy chose to move past it. Acknowledging uncertainty would have meant reopening the decision, and at that point, comfort in the choice felt easier than confronting potential risk. In the early phase, everything appeared to align with expectations. Updates were shared, numbers were visible, and the experience seemed to confirm that the decision was working. This reinforced confidence. This guy began to feel more secure about the investment, not because it had been independently verified, but because the initial signals seemed positive. This is where confirmation bias quietly begins to influence perception. Information that supports the decision feels more important, while anything that contradicts it gets minimized or rationalized. As time passed, this guy became more engaged with the investment. Checking updates became a routine. It wasn't just about tracking performance anymore. It became a source of reassurance. Each time the numbers looked positive, confidence increased. Each time there was a delay or inconsistency, it created a small amount of discomfort. But instead of reacting strongly, this guy explained it away. Thoughts like, "This is probably normal," or "systems like this take time," helped maintain emotional balance without challenging the underlying assumptions. Gradually, this guy's mindset started adapting to the situation. When things go smoothly, trust strengthens naturally. But when small inconsistencies appear, the brain often tries to protect the initial decision by rationalizing them. This is not unique to this guy. It's a common human tendency. Once we commit to something, especially something involving money and expectations, We subconsciously try to avoid the discomfort of admitting a mistake too early. The first real sign of concern came when a withdrawal request was delayed. Not rejected, not denied, just delayed. On the surface, that alone didn't confirm anything negative. And this guy chose to interpret it in a way that preserved trust. Waiting felt easier than questioning. So this guy waited, expecting that the delay would resolve itself. In many cases, delays can be normal, but what matters is how they are handled and whether they repeat. Over time, communication began to change. Responses became slower, less detailed, and occasionally vague. Updates were not as consistent as before. These changes were noticeable, but this guy didn't immediately escalate concern. Instead, he adjusted his expectations. He assumed there could be operational reasons behind the delays. The mind often prefers explanations that maintain stability rather than confront uncertainty directly. And this guy's thinking followed that pattern. As more time passed, additional withdrawal requests encountered similar issues. At this point, the pattern became harder to ignore. This prompted this guy to look beyond the platform and seek external information. Discussions, shared experiences, and similar cases began to surface. And gradually, a concerning picture started to form. One that suggested the possibility of unauthorized or illegal operations behind similar types of opportunities. This was the moment where denial started to weaken. Emotionally, this guy experienced a shift. The focus moved away from potential gains and toward possible loss. The realization that the situation might not be what it initially appeared to be created a sense of regret and frustration. This guy began replaying earlier decisions, questioning whether more verification could have prevented this outcome. Why weren't deeper questions asked? Why were early signals not taken more seriously? These reflections didn't change the past, but they helped clarify how the decision was made. This guy began to understand that the issue wasn't just the investment itself, it was the psychological process behind it. Trust was given too quickly without sufficient validation. Optimism outweighed skepticism. The desire for faster results influenced judgment. These patterns are not uncommon. In fact, they appear in many financial decisions, often without being consciously recognized at the time. Another important realization for this guy was how powerful social proof and presentation can be. When something is presented professionally, with consistent messaging and confident communication, it naturally creates a sense of legitimacy, even without hard evidence. That a structured presentation can influence perception. This guy learned that appearances can sometimes mask underlying realities, which is why independent verification is essential. Over time, this guy stepped back and analyzed the situation more objectively. Instead of focusing only on the loss, he focused on the behavior that led to it. This shift allowed him to extract lessons rather than remain stuck in regret. He recognized the importance of due diligence, not just surface-level checks, but deeper verification through independent sources. He also realized the importance of asking uncomfortable questions early, especially when something promises returns that seem unusually high. This guy also developed a clearer understanding of emotional discipline in investing. Decisions should not be driven by urgency, excitement, or fear of missing out. No, they require patience, clarity, and the willingness to walk away when something doesn't fully make sense. Uncertainty is not something to ignore. It is something to investigate. And when clarity is not available, hesitation is often the safer choice. Another lesson this guy took away was about risk management. Allocating a large portion of capital into a single opportunity without diversification increases exposure to potential failure. A more balanced approach would have reduced the impact of any single outcome. This guy realized that protecting capital is just as important as growing it, because without protection, growth becomes unstable. In the end, this guy's experience goes beyond a single financial decision. It reflects how human psychology interacts with money, how easily optimism can influence judgment, how trust can be built too quickly, and how important it is to balance opportunity with caution. This guy didn't just lose money. He gained awareness of his own decision-making patterns, awareness of biases, and awareness of how to approach future opportunities with a more grounded mindset. And perhaps the most important lesson this guy learned is simple. In investing, the real risk is not always in the opportunity itself, but in how it is evaluated. Because sometimes, the most convincing opportunities are the ones that require the most careful verification before being trusted.